I never thought jury duty would change my life. Honestly, when that envelope showed up in my mailbox, I rolled my eyes and tossed it on the counter like it was a flyer for a timeshare. I mean, who actually wants to do jury duty? But I had no excuses left. I wasn't in school anymore, my job was flexible, and I couldn't claim a hardship just because I didn't feel like sitting in a windowless room listening to lawyers drone on. So on a random Tuesday morning, I dragged myself downtown, coffee in one hand, ID in the other, dressed in what I hoped passed for respectably bored citizen. That's when I saw him. It was one of those weird things you can't explain, how your eyes just land on someone in a crowd. He was sitting by the far wall of the juror lounge, flipping through a paperback. Tall, probably a few years older than me, sharp jawline, messy hair like he just rolled out of bed and made no apologies for it. He wore a hoodie under a blazer. Casual but effortlessly cool, like he didn't care what anyone thought but somehow still looked better than half the room. He caught me looking and smirked. I quickly looked away and pretended to study the water fountain like it held deep philosophical meaning. The selection process was long and tedious, but as fate would have it, we both got picked for the same trial. It was a murder case, the kind that seemed ripped from a prestige TV show. Complicated, messy, and high-profile enough that they warned us from the start. If we got selected, we might be sequestered. When they read off the names of the 12 jurors, my stomach sank a little, partly from nerves, partly from the fact that I was now tied to this for who knew how long. But then he stood up when they called his name, right after mine. And suddenly, it didn't seem so bad. We didn't talk much that first day, just sat across from each other in the deliberation room, listening to the lawyers make their opening statements, watching the evidence start to unfold. But during the lunch break, he ended up next to me in line at the sandwich cart outside the courthouse. "You look like you regret showing up," he said, biting into an apple like we were old friends. I snorted. "That obvious? I saw you glaring at your ham and cheese like it personally offended you." That made me laugh, and something about the way he said it, dry, amused, without trying too hard, put me at ease. "I'm Evan," I said, holding out a hand. He looked at it, then shook it briefly. "Caleb." From that point on, we kind of gravitated toward each other. We sat near each other in the jury box, made dumb comments under our breath during recess, smirked when the lawyers got dramatic. It wasn't flirty exactly. Not yet. But it was easy, comfortable in a way that surprised me. By the end of the third day, we had inside jokes. By the end of the fourth, I caught myself watching the way he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his mouth pulling into a crooked grin, whenever the defense attorney said something ridiculous. That's when the judge dropped the bomb. Due to some security concern with a key witness, we were getting sequestered. Effective immediately. No going home, no phones, we'd be staying in a hotel under supervision for the rest of the trial. There was an audible groan from the jurors, but Caleb just raised an eyebrow, looked at me, and said under his breath, "Guess you're stuck with me now." That night, we were checked into a hotel on the edge of downtown. They gave us individual rooms, but all on the same floor, and we were escorted in like school kids on a field trip. The halls were weirdly quiet. The TVs only had basic cable, no internet, no calls. It felt like a very polite form of prison. At dinner, which they brought to the hotel's conference room, buffet style, I ended up across the table from Caleb again. He gave me a tired smile. "Feels like summer camp for adults who committed the crime of being too available," he said. I laughed. "Minus the s'mores." He tilted his head. "Speak for yourself." "I brought snacks." "Please tell me you're not the guy hoarding trail mix in his suitcase." "Not trail mix," he said, reaching into his hoodie pocket. "But close." He pulled out a tiny bag of peanut M&Ms and tossed them onto the table. "Emergency rations," he said, grinning. And I don't know why that moment. Just a guy in a faded hoodie offering me stolen candy made something shift in my chest, but it did. Because that's when I realized I didn't mind being stuck here. Not really. Not with him. The first night in the hotel felt like something out of a liminal dream. That in-between space where real life paused but hadn't told you what to do with the silence. After dinner, the court liaison gave us the standard rundown. No leaving the premises, no contact with the outside world, no talking about the case outside designated hours, and no swapping rooms. Which, of course, made me immediately wonder what would happen if someone did. I was brushing my teeth in the little beige-tiled hotel bathroom when I heard a soft knock on my door. I hesitated, toothbrush halfway out of my mouth, foam still on my lips. Only one person would knock at that hour. I wiped my mouth and opened the door. Caleb stood there, barefoot, hoodie on but unzipped over a white tank, hair damp from a quick shower. He looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. "Hey," he said, like this was totally normal. "You want to sneak down to the vending machines with me? I need real junk food. That cafeteria dinner didn't cut it." I blinked. "Pretty sure that's against the rules," he raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure it's not a crime to crave sour gummy worms." I laughed despite myself and grabbed my keycard. The hotel was quiet, almost too quiet, with carpeted hallways that muffled our steps as we crept down like two kids trying not to wake up their parents. Caleb made a game out of it, ducking dramatically at corners, pretending to clear hallways with finger guns. When we reached the vending machines tucked near the gym, we stared at the blinking lights like we'd just discovered buried treasure. "All right," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Operation Sugar Surge begins now." He picked out a bag of gummy worms and a can of root beer. I went for Cheez-Its and a Snickers. As we stood there, eating in silence by the dim glow of the soda machine, it hit me how weirdly intimate the moment felt. Not romantic, not yet, just quiet, comfortable. "You seem way too chill about all this," I said after a few bites. "The trial, being stuck here, no phone, no outside contact. I'd be losing my mind if you weren't keeping things light." He shrugged, chewing slowly. "Grew up in foster care. You get used to weird living situations. Temporary homes. Random rules? I got good at making the best of shitty setups." I glanced over, not sure how to respond. That wasn't something he'd shared in our usual sarcasm-laced chats. He caught my expression and smiled, softer this time. "It's not a sob story," he added quickly. "Just explains why I'm good at Camp Lockdown here." "I didn't think it was a sob story," I said, quieter. "I just didn't know that about you." He looked at me then. Not the teasing, smirking glance I was used to, but a slower kind of gaze, like he was reading between lines I didn't realize I'd written. "I don't usually tell people," he said, "but you're easy to talk to." The air shifted between us. Just a flicker of something, like a pause in music right before the beat drops. I nodded, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. "You're easy to listen to." That made him laugh, this low, surprised sound that felt real in a way his usual sarcasm didn't. He reached into the bag of gummy worms and held one out to me. I leaned in without thinking, took it straight from his fingers. His hand lingered in the space between us. "Okay, we should probably go back before we get caught and sentenced to even more jury duty," I said, voice a little shakier than I wanted it to be. "Yeah," he said, but he didn't move. Neither did I. Then he stepped back, suddenly shy. "Night, Evan." "Night, Caleb." I didn't sleep much. Not because of the hotel bed, but because of the way he looked at me. Like he wasn't just joking anymore. The next morning, Caleb was back to being his usual sarcastic self. In the hotel dining area, he sat down across from me with a plate full of soggy waffles and a banana he was clearly not planning to eat. "5-star cuisine," he said, stabbing the waffle half-heartedly. "Michelin should be knocking on their door any minute." Yeah, right after they inspect the dust on my nightstand. We both laughed, but underneath it, I could feel it. The same tension from the vending machine moment, not uncomfortable. Just there. Like we were both waiting to see if it would happen again, or if it even meant anything at all. That day in court was heavy. Witness testimony, crime scene photos, expert analysis. The energy in the jury box had shifted. People leaned forward. Some looked pale. Others scribbled notes furiously. I kept stealing glances at Caleb, who had gone completely still during the forensic testimony. His jaw was tight, eyes locked on the screen, like he wasn't just focused, like something had hit a nerve. During the lunch break, I caught up to him outside the courthouse, where he stood smoking a cigarette even though he'd never mentioned being a smoker before. "You okay?" He shrugged. "Yeah, just reminds me of something I went through. That's all." "You don't have to talk about it," I said gently. He looked at me then, and for a second I thought he might. But he just nodded, flicked the cigarette away, and said, "Thanks. You hungry?" That night, back at the hotel, most of the jurors stayed in their rooms, drained from the emotional weight of the day. I'd just gotten out of the shower, towel around my waist, hair still damp, when there was another knock at my door. I didn't even have to ask who it was. Caleb stood there, barefoot again, holding 2 plastic cups of what looked suspiciously like soda from the lobby. His eyes scanned me quickly, pausing at the towel, then darting back up to my face. "Should I come back later?" I stepped aside. "Depends if that's actual soda or if you smuggled whiskey into the vending machine." He grinned. "Technically, both." Inside, he handed me a cup and made himself at home, sitting on the edge of my bed. I pulled on a t-shirt and shorts, still drying my hair with the towel. "I didn't want to be alone tonight," he said after a pause. "Not in a weird way. Just sometimes quiet makes my brain loud, you know?" "Yeah," I said, sitting next to him. "I know exactly what you mean." We sipped in silence for a bit. The room was dim, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound between us. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "You ever feel like you meet someone at exactly the wrong time?" I turned toward him. "You mean right person, wrong timing kind of thing?" "Yeah, like if circumstances were different, maybe something would happen." My heart thudded in my chest, slow and heavy. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to answer or just sit in that moment with him. "I think," I said carefully, "sometimes the timing feels wrong because it's unexpected. But maybe it's actually exactly when you need it." He looked at me for a long moment. No smirk, no sarcasm. And then, without warning, he leaned in. Not fast, not dramatic, just a slow, quiet movement. Like he was giving me time to stop it if I wanted to. I didn't stop him. Our lips touched, tentative at first. Soft. Almost unsure. Then firmer, his hand finding the side of my neck, pulling me closer. I let my hand rest against his chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of his heart under his hoodie. When we finally pulled apart, he didn't say anything, just rested his forehead against mine. I exhaled. "Well, that's definitely against court policy." He laughed, a short, breathless sound. "Yeah, we're terrible jurors." I smiled, brushing my thumb along his jaw. "Guess we'll just have to keep this extremely unprofessional." The next morning, everything felt different. Not in a bad way, just sharper, louder. Like I'd stepped into a version of reality where the colors were dialed up and every glance meant more than it used to. I woke up early, mostly because I hadn't really slept. My brain had been looping the kiss over and over, playing it like a favorite movie I didn't want to end. Caleb hadn't stayed the night. He'd left shortly after with a quiet, "See you tomorrow," his fingers lingering against mine a moment longer than necessary before he slipped out. Now I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, nursing a cup of stale coffee, waiting for the knock that eventually came. Caleb stood there, dressed the same as always, hoodie, jeans, sneakers. But something in his face was softer. He didn't smile like he usually did. Just gave me a look that said, "Yeah, that happened. We didn't talk about it on the walk to breakfast. Just exchanged small smirks and quiet nudges when the eggs were rubbery or someone spilled juice." It was normal, almost. But in court, it hit me. We still weren't us. We were jurors. Strangers, technically. And the case was getting messier by the hour. Witnesses were contradicting themselves. New evidence was introduced. It was like watching a puzzle being dumped on the floor, and everyone was scrambling to find the corners. At one point, the judge called a recess, and we filed into the jury room to breathe. Caleb dropped into the chair next to me, his knee brushing mine under the table. It was subtle, barely a touch, but I felt it. Then someone asked about the verdict, not directly. We weren't supposed to talk about it yet, but there was a shift in tone, a glance, a raised eyebrow. People were starting to make up their minds. I stayed quiet. Caleb did too. Later, in the elevator ride back up to our hotel floor, it was just the two of us. The air felt thick, like it had weight. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." He nodded slowly, looking up at the flickering floor numbers. "It's a lot, especially after last night." I leaned against the elevator wall. "You mean the kiss or the murder trial?" He gave a tiny laugh. "Both, though the kiss felt more intense." That made me snort. "You're not wrong." When the elevator doors opened, we lingered in the hallway again. I didn't know what to say. I'd never done this before. Felt something real while locked in a hotel for a literal legal obligation. "I want to talk about it," he said finally, "but I don't want it to get in the way of everything else. We're still doing this." "The trial," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, I don't want you to think I'm messing around, Evan. I'm not." That kiss meant something. I looked at him for a long second, trying to read him the way I'd been reading witnesses on the stand all week, trying to find the lie in his face. There wasn't one. "I know," I said. "It meant something to me, too." That night I expected things to feel awkward, but they didn't. After lights out, Caleb knocked again. This time I opened the door without hesitation. We didn't say anything. He just stepped in, sat on the bed, and pulled his knees up like he'd done it 100 times before. I joined him. Our shoulders touched, his foot pressed gently against mine. We watched TV on mute, some bad cop show playing in the background. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Eventually, he reached over and took my hand. Quiet. Easy. Just rested it there between us like it belonged. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt calm. Not because I had answers, but because I wasn't alone in the not knowing. The day the case was handed to us for deliberation, everything inside me knotted up. No more testimonies. No more exhibits. No more dramatic gasps from the gallery or objections shouted across the courtroom. Just 12 of us, a long table, and the weight of someone's life on the line. We were escorted to the jury room like we were being led into battle. No phones, no distractions, just legal pads filled with messy handwriting and coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. And Caleb, sitting across from me, his eyes unreadable for once, the foreperson, some accountant-looking guy who had taken meticulous notes every day, called us to order. Everyone took turns talking. Some were sure of the defendant's guilt. Others had doubts. I kept looking at Caleb, but he didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than usual. "I just think we need to be careful. The prosecution filled in a lot of blanks, but there were gaps. We're not supposed to guess. We're supposed to know. Beyond a reasonable doubt." People nodded. A few looked uncomfortable. But he was right. He always had a way of cutting through the noise without trying to dominate the room. He said just enough, then leaned back in his chair and let it settle. Deliberations dragged on for hours. By the time we broke for the evening, nothing had been decided. People were frustrated, tired. One woman was crying softly in the corner. I felt like I hadn't taken a full breath all day. Back at the hotel, I showered, changed into the only clean clothes I had left, and waited. I didn't even pretend to watch TV this time. I just sat on the edge of the bed, my hands on my knees, staring at the door. He knocked right on time. "Hey," he said, stepping inside. "Hey!" He looked tired, his eyes a little red, his shoulders tense under that same worn hoodie. He didn't sit this time. Just stood there in the middle of the room, hands in his pockets. "You okay?" I asked. He gave a tiny nod, then shook his head. "I don't know." I stood too, walked over, and for a second we just stood there, inches apart. Not touching, not speaking. Just existing together in the space between stress and whatever this thing was between us. "I don't want to screw this up," he said quietly. "This?" He nodded. "We haven't even defined what this is." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it scarier." I hesitated, then reached out and touched his arm, slowly sliding my hand up to rest against his neck. "Maybe we don't have to define it right now. Maybe we just let it be whatever it is. His breath hitched a little. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine again, a gesture that was becoming second nature between us. Like punctuation at the end of a sentence only we understood. I don't think I've ever met someone like you, he murmured. That's probably because I don't usually show up to court-mandated social events. He snorted, the sound muffled against my shoulder as he pulled me into a hug. Not a quick one, not a nervous one, a real one. The kind that lets you feel how tense someone's been and how badly they needed to let go. We stayed like that for a long time. Later, he lay next to me on the bed, our legs tangled under the thin hotel blanket. Neither of us tried anything. We just were. His hand rested on my chest, his thumb tracing idle lines near my collarbone. Outside, the city moved on without us. Cars passed. Sirens wailed. Somewhere far below, life kept happening. But in that room, time stopped. The next morning felt heavier than any before. We didn't say much while getting ready. Caleb kissed me once, soft and slow, before we left the room, and that was the only thing that kept my nerves from spiraling. As soon as we entered the jury room, the door clicked shut behind us, and I knew this was it. Decision day. The foreperson asked us to review the final points, but honestly, most of us had already made up our minds. We'd spent hours the night before dissecting every detail. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. But the standard was clear. Beyond a reasonable doubt. And there was doubt. Real, stubborn, lingering doubt. After another hour of going back and forth, we voted. Not guilty. Some people looked relieved. Others still looked torn. Caleb didn't show anything on his face. Just nodded once, quietly, like the gravity of it wasn't lost on him, on any of us. When we returned to the courtroom and the verdict was read, there was a ripple of gasps behind us. I kept my eyes forward, heart pounding. The defendant broke down. His attorney clapped a hand on his back. The prosecutor didn't move. It was over. The judge thanked us, dismissed us, told us we could finally talk to the media if we wanted. Most of us just wanted to go home. Outside, the November air hit like a slap, brisk and sharp after days in recycled hotel air. A few jurors lingered on the courthouse steps, exchanging awkward goodbyes and half-hearted take-cares. I hung back, waiting for Caleb. He came out a few minutes later, squinting into the gray sky. "Hey," I said, stepping up beside him. "Hey," he replied, hands in his pockets. "So, what now?" It was a good question. There was no more hotel, no more court-mandated meals, no more strange excuse to fall asleep next to each other under government supervision. "You want to get coffee or something?" I asked. He looked over at me, really looked, and something shifted in his face. A flicker of hesitation, quickly smoothed over. "I was going to ask if you wanted to come back to my place." That caught me off guard, but not in a bad way, more like a jolt of something warm in the middle of a cold morning. "I thought you lived across the river." "Yeah, but I figure if we made it through court-mandated intimacy, traffic won't kill us." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're so weird." "You're still coming, though." "I know," I said, grinning. We got in his car, this beat-up little Toyota that smelled faintly of pine and fast food. His hand brushed mine as we both reached for the climate controls at the same time, and instead of pulling away, he left it there, resting, casual, like we'd always done this. We didn't talk much during the drive, but it wasn't silence either. Just this easy kind of presence between us, the kind you don't have to explain. His apartment was on the third floor, small but clean, with stacks of books and a lazy cat that barely lifted its head when we walked in. "Ignore Milo," he said, kicking off his shoes. "He hates everyone." Milo immediately jumped on the couch and curled into my lap as soon as I sat down. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Traitor," I shrugged. "He has good taste." Caleb flopped down next to me, arm brushing mine again. I leaned into it this time. No court. No juror numbers. No, we probably shouldn't. Just us. "You want to talk about it?" he asked. "The trial?" "All of it," I thought for a second. "Eventually. But not right now." "Good," he said. "Me neither." He reached for the remote, turned on some random show, and leaned back. I let myself relax into the couch, into him, into this strange, quiet freedom that felt too new to define but too real to ignore. Because we hadn't planned this. We hadn't expected it. But sometimes you meet someone in the most random, inconvenient, legally binding way, and it just clicks. 2 weeks later, it still didn't feel real. Not the trial. That had faded fast. The media attention came and went. A few headlines. A couple of opinion pieces. No one mentioned the jurors. We were just numbers in the public narrative. But Caleb was real. Every morning I woke up and had to remind myself that, yeah, this was happening. It wasn't a fever dream or a hotel fantasy. We weren't just two guys caught in a strange emotional moment. This thing between us had legs. We hadn't defined it. Not officially. We were just seeing each other. He said it casually once while introducing me to a friend at a bookstore. "This is Evan. We're seeing each other." Then he squeezed my shoulder like it didn't scare the shit out of him to say it out loud. But I could tell he was still adjusting. I was too, if I'm being honest. He'd never dated a guy before. I had. Enough to know the difference between chemistry and connection. And with Caleb, it wasn't just sparks, it was anchor. Like I'd met someone who made the noise in my head quieter. But it wasn't all easy. Sometimes he got quiet when we were out. Not because he didn't want to be seen with me, but because something about it made him retreat inward. Maybe memories, maybe fear, maybe just unfamiliar territory. I didn't push. We took things slow. Coffee dates, couch nights, movies at home. A trip to a winter street fair where he bought me hot cider and we nearly froze our asses off walking back to his place. Somewhere along the way, toothbrushes got left behind. Drawers got shared. I knew which hoodie of his fit me best. He knew how I took my coffee without asking. But the weird part? We hadn't really talked about what happened at the trial. Not in detail. Not about the weight of what we saw, what we carried. One night, while we were lying on his bed, me half asleep, him scrolling on his phone, he set it down and said quietly, "I still think about it sometimes. The case." I opened my eyes. "Yeah, me too." "You ever wonder if we got it wrong?" I turned on my side to face him. His eyes were distant, jaw tight, that look he got when something gnawed at him from the inside out. "I do," I said honestly. "But I also know we did our best with what we had." He nodded slowly. "It just messes with you, you know? Knowing your decision changes someone's life forever." "I know." He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and laced his fingers through mine. "Thanks for being there, not just in the hotel, after." I squeezed his hand. "Same. That night we didn't cross the line. We didn't even make out. We just held each other in that quiet, vulnerable way that means more than any physical thing ever could. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about us was polished or predictable, but it felt real. And real was more than enough. Spring came early that year. It was one of those afternoons where the air smelled faintly like thawed earth and damp sidewalks, the sun out just enough to make people overconfident about leaving their jackets at home. Caleb and I were sitting outside a cafe, sharing a bench too small for two grown men, but neither of us bothered to move. He had his legs stretched out in front of him, one ankle lazily crossed over the other, sipping an iced coffee with that same crooked grin that had messed me up back in the jury box. "I'm just saying," he said, "if you keep ordering the same boring latte every time, I'm going to start judging you out loud instead of silently." "It's called consistency," I said, nudging his knee with mine. "Some of us find comfort in routine. Some of us," he echoed, mock serious, "have the coffee taste of a suburban soccer mom." I laughed and leaned back, letting my shoulder press into his a little more. We still weren't the couple who made a show of things. He didn't love holding hands in public, not because he was ashamed. He told me that once, but because it still felt new, like we hadn't quite earned it yet. And that was okay. He showed up in other ways, like the time I got sick and he stayed up all night Googling if my fever was normal. Or when I had a crappy day at work and he showed up at my place with Thai food and one of those trashy thriller novels I secretly loved but never admitted out loud. It was slow, unfolding in layers. But I was learning that love didn't always need a big declaration. Sometimes it was just showing up, choosing each other again and again. Later that night, we were back at his place. He was sprawled on the couch, bare feet on my lap, flipping through a home improvement magazine like he was planning to renovate a house he didn't even own. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking up. "Dangerous start," I replied. "I might move." That made me blink. "What?" He looked up finally. "Not far, just something bigger. More space." I studied him. "You've got space now." He hesitated, then tossed the magazine onto the table and sat up. "Yeah, but I've got 2 toothbrushes in my bathroom now, and 3 different brands of cereal in the cabinet, and someone who leaves their socks in places I swear I never understand." I smirked. "Sounds like a personal problem." He ignored that. "I guess what I'm saying is, I like having you here, a lot, and I want it to feel like it's ours, not like you're crashing in someone else's life." My heart did this quiet flip. Not the dramatic kind, more like the moment right before you realize you've already fallen, and now you're just figuring out where to land. "You asking me to move in?" I asked. "Not officially, yet, just planting the seed." I leaned forward, resting my hands on his knees. "Then consider the seed watered." He laughed, bright and unguarded, and then he kissed me, this slow, certain thing that felt like a full sentence with no words. We didn't need a verdict for this. No jury, no courtroom. Just the quiet knowing between 2 people who found each other in the most unexpected way. Because maybe that's how real stories start, not with fireworks or fate, but in a beige courtroom on a Tuesday morning. And a guy in a hoodie who made you feel seen and never once looked away.